The Premier League starts this weekend. And before it all kicks off, it is of course time to put in my Premier League predictions for this season. Now, as always, I do have some reminders for you. Number one, this is a prediction. Nobody knows if I'm right or wrong until May of 2026.
That is true!
And two, this is my opinion. You can have your opinion, and it can be different to mine, and that's okay, because that's how opinions work.
That is also true!
However, with that being said though, please do feel free to let me know down below whether you agree or disagree and what your predictions are if you wish, as long as you're nice. And while you're down there, of course, please feel free to leave a like on this video and hit the subscribe button as well. It does help me out a lot. And with that being said then, here are my predictions. So, we have our trusty tier list, as we always do. We have got 6 tiers this year. We've got champions. We've got the UCL from 2nd to 5th, which I'm not sure is necessarily correct. I think the fact that we had 5 Champions League spots last year was a rarity. We then have the Europa League and the Conference League spots 6th to 7th. Higher mid-table is 8th to 12th. Lower mid-table is 13th to 17th, which I also don't agree with. I don't think the team that comes 17th is going to consider themselves lower mid-table. And then of course we round it up with the relegation zone 18th to 20th. Now, as I did say in the intro, this is my opinion, this is what I believe. Do I know? No, it's a guess, really. It's an educated guess. That's all this is. I have done these predictions. I think this is the 3rd season now I've done these predictions, and I'm getting more accurate every year. It was considerably better last year, so I'm feeling confident. And we'll kick things off, obviously, with the relegation zone. Starting off 20th place. I hate to say it, but it just has to be Sunderland, doesn't it? It has to be Sunderland. Last year they came 4th in the Championship. They didn't even come 3rd in the Championship last season. They came 4th with 76 points, which means they were 24 points behind both Leeds and Burnley.
Damn!
They have, however, gone absolutely mental in the transfer window. They spent over 120 mil, and they have brought in some Premier League experience with the likes of Granit Xhaka, Adingra and Masuaku. However, a lot of their signings could be called up to AFCON. Now, the reason I put them last is because although they have spent a lot in the transfer market, the team is still not great. As I said, they finished 4th in the Championship, and they've also lost one of their best players in Bellingham, who's gone to Dortmund. I'm fairly confident with this one. I think they will be the Southampton of this season, although I am very much looking forward to the Tyneside derbies this year, especially now they have Granit Xhaka involved. In 19th, we're keeping a theme. It's another newly promoted team.
Hey, that rhymes.
We're going Burnley in 19th place. Last season they did finish 2nd in the Championship, but they were level on points with Leeds. And they have again spent a little bit of money in the transfer window. They spent about £100 million. However, the reason they're 19th is I still think they're too weak to survive in the Prem. But they still finished 24 points above Sunderland last season, so they can't finish lower than Sunderland in my head. They have spent a lot of money on Premier League experience with Ugachukwu, Broja and Kyle Walker. Nobody had that on their 2025 bingo card. But they did lose their number 1 keeper in Trafford, who kept 30 clean sheets last season. And just because all 3 promoted teams went down last season, I just don't see Burnley staying up. And then of course the final promoted team, we're wrapping it up with Wolves. I don't think Leeds go down. Yes, I think Wolves finish in 18th. At the time of recording, Wolves aren't at a great spot right now, but there is plenty of time left in the transfer window. They could change their fortunes around. Last year they did come 16th, but they struggled for a lot of last season. They lost 20 out of 38 games. They were the 8th lowest scoring team in the league with 54 goals, and 15 of those goals came from Cunha, who's now gone. As well as that, they've also lost Ait-Nouri, who also had a very good year last season. They have signed Strand Larsen on a permanent deal rather than him being on loan like last season, but they haven't really replaced the people they've lost with players of equal quality. At least I don't think so. They have got a good manager who did turn it around at the back end of last season, but I don't know. I don't think this will be a good year for Wolves. Now, you'll notice I don't think the 3 promoted teams are going to go down. Where do I think Leeds are going to come? You may be wondering. Well, 17th. I do think Leeds will just about scrape staying in the league. I think they'll finish 17th. Last year they won the Championship. They came 1st. They got 100 points as well, which is pretty impressive. They have spent the least out of the 3 new promoted clubs as well, so there's likely chance that they will spend more in the back end of the transfer window. Daniel Farke has got a lot of Premier League experience. Even though there was talk of him getting sacked ready for this new season, even though he got them promoted from the Championship. So clearly he's not very well backed by the board. Now I might be a little bit biased because I do have mates who are Leeds fans, but out of the 3 promoted teams, I think Leeds will stay up. In 16th, I think West Ham come 16th. Last year they came 14th, so it's a little bit worse than last year. And to be fair to them, they have spent well in the transfer window. They've spent around £70 million at the time of recording. They've signed Todibo permanently. They've got Hermansen from Leicester and Walker-Peters. They've also signed Callum Wilson on a free, so he'll be great for the 3 games of the season he's fit for. However, they've lost Kudus, and he was a big part of their attack last season. And to be honest, I just don't rate Graham Potter as a manager. I don't think he's done very well so far. I honestly don't think he'll stay for the entire season. Don't get me wrong, I think they'll stay up, but I don't see it being a very good season for West Ham. Speaking of not being very good seasons, we move to 15th, and this one is a little bit of a Hail Mary shout from me. Because in 15th, I'm putting Brentford. At the time of recording, it's not looking good, bruv. Last year they came 10th, but last season they did do very well. They spent about 50 million in this transfer window, either on players I haven't heard of, or players who used to play for Liverpool. Brentford had a really good strike force last season. They were the 5th highest scoring team in the league, and they scored almost 40 goals between Wissa and Mbeumo by themselves. And a big part of that was, of course, Thomas Frank, who I really highly rate as a manager. However, the reason I've put them 15th is because they've lost everything. They've lost their manager, their backroom staff, their club captain, their first choice keeper, and one of their strikers who scored 20 goals last season. As well as Mbeumo, Wissa is also highly wanted by a lot of other clubs, mostly Newcastle, but I think at this point they just want somebody not to reject them. I don't know their new manager at all. I don't know how good he is. And although they have bought in some players, as I did mention earlier, I'm not sure it's going to be enough to replace what they've lost, especially up front. And we move to 14th. I could see this one happening. I'm putting Crystal Palace in 14th. Last year they obviously came 12th, but they also got European football last year. However, off the back of one of their best seasons ever, there is confusion as to which European competition they will be in. At the time of recording, I think they're now in the Europa Conference League, even though winning the FA Cup gets you Europa League football, and it's something to do with the fact that the owners of Crystal Palace also own another club in the Europa League, even though there's hundreds of Red Bull teams dotted around the world, but they're not owned by the same person apparently. But because they didn't know which European competition they will be in until very recently, they haven't been able to spend very much because they don't know how much money they've earned. In fact, they've only spent £2 million in this summer window, and they've made no money by selling players either. They have got a very solid team though. They won the Community Shield last weekend.
I like it.
And I do think Oliver Glasner is a very good manager. I do think they could do very well in the Conference League if that is the European competition they end up in. And come the end of the season, I think they might prioritise Europe if they're still in the competition. And so I don't think they'll finish quite as high as last season, but I think they'll do quite well. 13th, unlucky for some, and it's fairly unlucky for this club as well. I'm going Bournemouth in 13th. The higher end of the lower mid-table. They had a very good season last year. They finished 9th. I actually predicted them to finish 15th, and then they spent most of the season pushing for European football. However, the reason they're 13th is they've lost a lot of players. They've lost pretty much their entire defence. They've lost Huijsen to Real Madrid, Kerkez to Liverpool, and they've lost both Travers and Kepa as well. And I've got written on my notes as well that Zabani is also wanted by a lot of clubs, and then I've read this morning Zabani has also gone to PSG. So they've lost 2 centre-backs, a left-back and 2 goalkeepers. Obviously when I'm recording this there's a long time left of the transfer window, but they're going to have to do a lot to replace these players. Moving to 12th, I think this will be a very good season for Everton. I think Everton finish at the bottom of the higher mid-table. I think this will be a very good season for Everton, although saying that, they did actually finish 13th last season. They went on a really strong run of form at the end of last season with the appointment of David Moyes. And as well, this year they have a brand new stadium which has a ridiculously stupid name, but it will, I assume, bring in more fans for every home game. And the reason I think they'll finish 12th is because they've also done really well in the transfer window. They've brought in a new striker called Barry, who I don't know who that is, but they've also brought in Dewsbury Hall, who I have heard of, Travers, and at the time of recording this, we've had the here we go from Fabrizio that they're going to get Jack Grealish. As I say, I think this could be a really good season for Everton. They may even finish in the top half, but I think they will finish 12th. 11th. I think the team that will finish 11th this season is the team that finished 11th last season. I'm putting Fulham in 11th. And the reason I think they will come in the exact same place as last season is because they have the exact same team as last season. They haven't really sold or bought in anyone. At the time of recording, they've spent less than £500,000 this summer window, and they've made no money through selling players either. And as well, a big part of their team is the Nigerian boys in Bassi and Iwobi, who will both be going to AFCON in the December-January period. Right now, it's not looking good. I think this will be a very average season for Fulham at best. 10th. Now, 2 seasons ago, this would have been a very good season for this club. However, now, it's a bit of a drop-off. I'm going Nottingham Forest in 10th. As I said, a bit of a drop-off compared to last season, but still a very good season in comparison to where they have been in the last few years. They've also got European football this year, and I think they've now been bumped up to the Europa League to replace Palace. I think Palace and them have swapped, which is good for them because there's more money. However, in the Conference League, I think Forest could have gone on and won it. They do obviously have a chance of going quite far in the Europa League, but I'm not sure they have the squad to win it. I might be wrong, but I'm not confident. However, a big reason I still think they'll finish in the top half is because they managed to hold on to Morgan Gibbs-White by holding his family at gunpoint. They have lost Elanga to Newcastle, but they have spent a lot of money to strengthen the attack. However, I think they will somewhat focus on the European football rather than the Premier League, and so I think they will slip from 7th last season to 10th this season. In 9th, now this is a big leap. Coming all the way up from 15th to 9th, I'm going Man United. The fact that they were 15th last season is ridiculous, by the way. It's absolutely crazy. They had one of the worst seasons in the club's history last year. They finished 15th and lost nearly half of their games. They ranked 16th in the goals scored, and they only scored 15 more goals than Salah. So why then do I think they'll come 9th? Well, they've got no European football this year, which means they can fully focus on the domestic competitions. They've also done really well in the transfer market. They've really bolstered their attack with Sesko, Mbeumo and Cunha. Amorim is starting to get the players he wants to fit his system, but there's still a lot of dead wood at the club to get rid of. For example, you've still got Onana in goal. They're still relatively weak in midfield, defence and goalkeeper, but if they can sign a couple more players before the end of the transfer window, I think they could have a very good season, but I think they'll just fall short of the European spots. Coming up in 8th, Newcastle. Now last year they finished 5th and therefore they do have Champions League football this year. But considering they have Champions League football this season and they won their first trophy in God knows how many years, they cannot convince anyone to sign for their club. Sesko, Mbeumo, Ekitike, Trafford and João Pedro have all rejected them for other clubs this summer. And to make it even worse, Isak wants to leave. I think he's come out and said he will not play another game for Newcastle even if he's forced to stay at the club. For that reason, I think they should try and sell him. Not only because Liverpool are the only club he wants to go to, apparently, but I think he needs to go. They have signed Elanga and Ramsdale, but that is it at the time of recording. I do have a feeling they're going to struggle this season. I think they might even finish bottom of the Champions League group stage table thing that they introduced last year. Honestly, I could have easily put them lower, but they do still have, in my opinion, one of the best midfields in the league with Bruno, Tonali, Joe Linton. And if they do hold on to Isak and convince him to play football for them again, they've got a chance. But I'm predicting them 8th based on the fact that Isak will either go or he will refuse to play for the club ever again. And I don't think they're going to sign any more players simply because they just have no attraction for some reason. We have 7 clubs left. And based on last season, this is an enormous leap for this team. I'm putting Tottenham in 7th. And I really do believe this will be a much better year than last year because, to be fair, it can't be much worse. Last year they came 17th, and yes, I do think they will climb 10 places in one season. And that is because they are potentially at the best point they've been for a long time. They finally ended their trophy drought and they are in Europe this season in the Champions League, despite finishing 17th. And they've also got Thomas Frank, who I have previously mentioned I really highly rate as a manager. I think that's a great appointment for them. They've also done quite well in the transfer market. They've spent over £125 million. They've signed Kudus from West Ham and they've secured Tell and Danso, who were on loan. And they've also got João Paulinho on loan as well. Now they have lost James Maddison to a huge injury. I think he's done his ACL, so he's going to be out for most of the season. And they also didn't manage to get Morgan Gibbs-White, despite Fabrizio giving it the here we go, because Fabrizio did not anticipate the extremes that Marinakis would go to keep hold of Gibbs-White. But this means they might have to bring in an attacking midfielder like Eze, for example, who they have been linked with. According to my friend Matt, who is a Spurs fan, they are linked to a lot of attacking midfielders. And a big reason they came 17th last season is partly because Big Ange played a lot of terrorist football, but mostly because they had a lot of big injuries to very crucial players last year. And if they can avoid the injuries to these key players this season, I do trust Thomas Frank to turn it around at Spurs. I think they'll have a very good season. 6th. We've got Brighton. They have lost some key players. They've lost João Pedro, Adingra and Estupinan, but I don't think that will impact the team much at all, to be honest. They have also seemingly done the classic Brighton thing, where they've signed really young players, and I guarantee you they will turn out to be world beaters. The reason, therefore, I put them 6th is just because I trust their recruitment. I think those young players will just come out of nowhere and carry them through this season. They are also one of the strongest teams in the Premier League who doesn't have European football to compete with as well. They're also not losing massively to players going to AFCON. They've only got Carlos Baleba and Lamptey. Not even Minter is going because Gambia didn't qualify. Although, with that being said, Carlos Baleba is being linked to a lot of clubs right now. He is being linked to a move away, especially Man United, I think, are interested in him. However, a big thing for them is Fabian Hurtler now has a whole season of Premier League experience, and I do really rate him as a manager as well. If they can keep hold of Carlos Baleba and some of their other key players, I think this will be a very good season for Brighton. Moving into 5th. What is typically the Europa League spot, but apparently this is going to get Champions League according to this tier list. Out of the 5 clubs left, it's pretty obvious I'm going Aston Villa in 5th. Last year they came 6th, but at the time of recording they haven't really strengthened their team very much. They signed a new forward called Gesand. I've probably butchered that, but that's how it's spelt. And that's basically it. They have also lost Rashford, Asensio and Disasi, who are all on loan, but to be fair, that's not a huge loss. It's pretty much the same team as last season, but to be fair, that is a very good team. And I do also think Unai Emery is one of the best managers in the league. They have also got European football in the Europa League, and to be fair, I think they will go very far in that competition. They could even win it. And although that is extra games, it's less intense than it was for them last season with Champions League football. So I think they'll have another very good year. Moving into 4th, the top 4. I'm putting Chelsea in 4th. They had a very strong finish to last season, but a recurring problem for them last season was they struggled to score goals. They actually scored the same amount of goals as Spurs, who finished 17th. However, this year they've strengthened the attack. They've signed Bino Gittins, they've signed João Pedro, and they've signed Delap from Ipswich. And of course, recently they won the Club World Cup, which obviously isn't a huge indicator of how they will be this year, but they did batter PSG in the final, so that has to account for something. The reason, therefore, I've put them 4th is because they've made over £200 million in sales, and they haven't really lost anyone that important. This also means that despite them having spent already 250 million, they can spend more before this transfer window ends, and knowing Chelsea, they probably will. They're not really losing anyone to AFCON either. Only Nicholas Jackson is probably going to go, and if anything, that probably strengthens the team. As I did say, they are in great form. Enzo Maresca seems to have found a system that he likes. And they do have Champions League football to compete with as well, but they've definitely got the squad depth to cope with these two competitions. I think this will be another very good season for Chelsea, especially considering what I said about them last year. But at the time of recording, what an absolute mess of a football club. Moving into the top 3. 3rd place. This is an interesting one because I don't think anyone else will predict this team to come here. I might be going too far the other way. I think Liverpool come 3rd.
Sorry, what?
I'm a very pessimistic Liverpool fan as it is, and even though we are defending champions, we finished 1st last season, and we spent a lot of money on very good players, I don't know. I just don't see it happening. But I'll give my reasons anyway. We have obviously signed Wirtz, Ekatike, Frimpong, Kirkez. We've strengthened the team massively. And we're also heavily linked to players like Isak, who'd rather not play football than play for Newcastle anymore. As well as being linked with Guehi and Rodrigo from Madrid for a long time as well. And we've sold over £150 million worth of players, with the likes of Luis Diaz and Nunes leaving. So we've got even more money to spend, but the reason I've put them 3rd, we've got the Champions League to contend with, as we did last season as well. However, the strength in depth, especially in defence, I don't think it's enough to have a good campaign in both the Prem and the Champions League next season. There's also a lot of new players who need time to gel in the club, and also nobody expected Liverpool to win the league last season. It wasn't like it was nailed on. There is a chance that it was a one-off. It did coincide with one of the worst City teams we've ever seen, and we did also get a little bit lucky in the sense that Arsenal didn't really challenge either. Salah was absolutely insane last season. He was arguably the best we've ever seen him, and we're going to lose him to AFCON halfway through the season. And I think the biggest factor, to be honest, is Jota. I think losing Jota especially at the start of the season, it's going to take a lot for the players to get used to travelling to away games and turning up to home games and him not being there anymore. And I know the Community Shield is a glorified friendly, and I would say that even if we did manage to win. But look at the players who played worst in that game. It was the players who have been at the club for a long time, like Van Dijk, like Salah. And I think laying down the wreaths and having the minute silence at the start of the game really messed them up. Okay, so I am just going to interrupt myself very quickly because as I'm editing this, it sounds very much like I'm blaming the players for allowing the loss of Jota to impact their season, which is absolutely not the case. Obviously, I completely sympathise with the way the Liverpool players are feeling, and I don't want to be seen to be putting across this agenda, but I'm blaming Jota's passing as a reason as to why Liverpool may not fulfil a lot of people's expectations this season. And as much as I would like to reword my reasoning and spend another 5 minutes discussing my predictions for Liverpool's season, considering the length of this video already, I'll save it for a separate video for another time, and I think we'll just move on. But especially with a lot of people pipping them to defend their title and win the league again, there is even more pressure on this Liverpool team than there has ever been before. And in the past, my club has not really dealt with pressure very well. I'd like to be wrong, I'd like them to finish higher, but I think they'll come third. Top two then. Top two. And it's these two again. Second place, I think it's Arsenal, man. I just do. I think it's Arsenal. They came second last year and the year before and the year before. I think they'll come second again. Now, they have got Champions League football and they've spent a lot of money. They've spent nearly £200 million on a lot of, to be fair, very good players. And as well as that, they had the best defence last season. They've improved their midfield, as I say, by bringing in players like Norgard from Brentford and Zubimendi. And they haven't really lost any big names other than Thomas Partey. But to be honest, I think that's a good thing for the club. And as I have said for the last couple of years, to be honest, the one thing holding them back is they didn't have a striker. However, this season they have splashed £60 million on one of the most clinical strikers in world football, at least last season. However, why do I think they'll finish second again? Well, Gyökeres is unproven. We don't know how good he's going to be. Yes, he scored a lot of goals, but he scored a lot of goals in the Portuguese league. And trust me, stats from the Portuguese league can be deceiving. Darwin Núñez! I also think they will equally prioritise the Champions League. I think the Prem and the Champions League are equally as important to Arsenal this season, especially since Tottenham won a European competition last year. And so if their league form starts to dip off, naturally they will look to focus in the Champions League and try and win that this year instead, I think. But speaking of pressure on Liverpool, there is even more pressure on Mikel Arteta to perform this year. In 6 years at the club, he's won an FA Cup and 2 Community Shields, and Oliver Glasner has nearly equalled that in 1 season at Crystal Palace. Arteta is, to be honest, just running out of chances. I think this could be his last year if Arsenal don't win anything this season. But of course, in first place then, I think City win it again. Boring. Boring. But I just do. I just think last season was a blip. Last season was well below everyone's expectations. It was their first trophyless season since Guardiola took over the club, and a big reason for that was obviously a massive injury to Rodri, who was named the best player in the world. He won the Ballon d'Or. And so a big part of this season is how will he return from injury. I know he's actually picked up another injury and we won't see him till I think mid-September, but I think he'll come back even better than before. I think it'll be a really close title race, especially with the top 3 teams. I think it'll be a much closer title race than last year, definitely. And I think the experience of Guardiola just outdoes the experience of Arteta. I think Guardiola gets them over the line. They have strengthened the team. They've spent over £150 million, as Man City always do, to be fair. They've lost big players like De Bruyne and Kyle Walker, but I think they'll cope without them because they brought in the likes of Reinders, Cherki, Ait-Nouri, and Trafford as well, who's probably one for the future. Edison must be going at this point. They will obviously lose Ait-Nouri and Marmoush to AFCON later this year, but that's basically it. And the reason I think they'll finish first is I think last season was just a one-off. I think it was just a blip. A lot of things went wrong for Man City last season, and I don't think they will again this year, but I would love to be wrong. And with that, that is my Premier League prediction. That is my Premier League table. In God knows how many months' time, in May, when I'm reviewing. Will I be even more accurate than last year? I don't know. I've put in a couple of Hail Mary shouts, but nothing too outrageous, I don't think. But we won't know, will we? We won't know until May. You can't argue with me until May. And if you really want to come back in May and argue with me, feel free. But that is going to be my prediction then. Let me know in the comments, as I say, what you agree with, what you don't agree with. Where do you think your team will finish in the Premier League? And with that being said then, I'm going to leave this video there. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you're new around here, please feel free to subscribe. Leave a like on the video as well. Turn on notifications to get notified when future videos come live. And I will see you all in my next video. See ya.